Hey, how you doing? I'm going to tell you the story of how I was unjustly locked up in Russia as a tourist. For those that don't know me, I'm an American travel vlogger, although that's not how I'd normally introduce myself. But to the Russian police, that was the only thing that mattered. This is not a happy travel vlog. I gotta warn you right now. This is a story of how senseless and brutal the Russian government can be, even towards someone whose opinion of Russia before all this was at worst neutral. It's not anymore, sadly. This is the story of how I was locked up in Russia for weeks, and the whole time I didn't think I'd ever get out. Let me tell you that story. I was originally arrested near a town on Russia's border with China called Leninskoye on Friday, October 25th. I was filming a vlog about the Jewish Oblast, or at least what was left of it, which wasn't much. I had arrived there that day from Bijan, the capital of the region, and also the place where I had left my luggage. This was only meant to be a day trip, and then I'd catch a train to Khabarovsk at night. My crime being within 20 kilometers of the border without a permit. This is the only actual crime that I committed, but it's obviously not a very serious one. According to Russian law, the penalty is simply 500 rubles, or $5. You would get fined more for a speeding ticket. I was arrested and taken to the border police office to fill out some paperwork. And the police themselves told me that it was just a fine, and I shouldn't worry. But then the officer received a call from Bijan, once again, the capital of the Jewish Oblast. All of a sudden, the plans changed. I would not just be paying a $5 fine. I'd have to stay in the police jail for up to 48 hours, they said. And so I was fingerprinted and had everything taken from me, except for my shirt and jeans. They even took my shoelaces. I had to walk around in my shoes without them. They put me into a tiny cell with a dirty mat and pillow. And then, a few hours after I entered the cell, I was told to come out again. Someone had come to see me. I was led into a small room with a table where two men and an interpreter were waiting for me. It was the FSB, the modern-day KGB. They had driven down 2 hours from Bijan to come and interrogate me. Apparently, they thought I was a spy. I began to get nervous. There were two officers. One was seated and aggressively conducting the interrogation. The other was just standing silently in the corner, filming. They were the worst kind of people you could encounter. Someone who thinks they're really smart, but actually isn't. They told me to speak English and told me to respond in it, but every time I did, they didn't understand and had to ask the interpreter to translate. I watched your YouTube videos, the officer said. They're very anti-Russia. He had determined this because the title of my first video was originally, "They told me not to visit Russia," clearly not understanding how YouTube clickbait works. Apparently, me speaking different languages, particularly Chinese, was very suspicious. The officer asked me a series of questions about why I was in Russia, trying to get me to admit I was an American spy. Then he began to ask me about my life in China, about what I did there, about what relationship I had with the Chinese government, which interestingly gave me the impression he thought I might actually be a Chinese spy. China and Russia may be allies, but I learned from this that they definitely don't trust each other. They also told me that I look like a drunkard because of my beard. As the interrogation ended, the officer told me that they were worried about my health and well-being. The next day, they were going to have me go for a health checkup. Ah, how nice of them. I immediately knew they were trying to find me with drugs in my system. My phone and camera were also taken. I was left to sleep, somehow, in my tiny cell. I woke up, and not long after, a a local FSB officer told me it was time for the health checkup. I was put in a car, and we drove for 2 hours through the nothingness of Far Eastern Russia. We arrived at a run-down-looking hospital where there was no one in sight. The FSB, who had interrogated me the night before, was waiting there. It turns out this wasn't a health checkup at all. It was a drug test, and only a drug test. I was told to go and pee in a cup. I did so, not thinking I had anything to hide. My sample was analyzed, and horrifyingly, my result threw a false positive. It said I had meth in my system. The FSB gleefully told me this through a translation app. Of course, I've never taken meth in my life. I'm not Walter White. And they would later retest my sample to show that I was clean. Except they never told me this. They let me sit there agonizing over if I had somehow accidentally ingested something with meth in it. A kind of psychological torture, the first of many. I was then driven 2 hours back to the police station and taken back to my cell, or maybe due to exhaustion, I managed to sleep the whole night. The next morning, I received what I thought was the best news of my life. You're free, the police said. I was led out of the cell to pick up the stuff I had on me when I was arrested. My wallet, my phone, my belt. I was able to tie my shoes again. I was brought from the town police station to the border police office and told I just had to pay 500 rubles, $5, and I was free to go. The border police officer who had originally arrested me was also there. He said he was going to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Everything felt surreal. I paid the fine. It was told by the border police that they arranged a taxi to take me back to Birobidzhan, the capital of the region. Go get your luggage and passport. Don't stop anywhere along the way, is what they told me. The taxi wasn't free. I had to pay the equivalent of $70. I immediately began sending messages to my family and friends, letting them know everything was all right. And then the taxi entered into the Siberian plains that stood between Leninskoye and Birobidzhan. There was no phone signal. But there was something weird about this taxi, and I could tell. The driver avoided eye contact with me and didn't speak the entire time. There was another woman in the back who also didn't speak. The rearview mirror was angled in a weird position, so I couldn't see what was behind me. After 2 excruciatingly long hours, we arrived back in Birobidzhan. I was going to tell the driver the address of the hotel I had stayed in, but the woman behind me was already telling her. It turns out this woman behind me is actually an FSB officer, and I immediately knew something really messed up, was about to happen. As soon as we arrived at the apartment, I saw there was an entire squadron of police waiting for me. Some were FSB. I was dragged out of the car without resisting and told to show my passport, but I couldn't. It was in the apartment, and they knew this. The 2 FSB officers who had interrogated me were there, and one was filming again. At no point was I told why I was being arrested again. Very quickly, I was led by 4 officers into another SUV, and then was driven to the Birobidzhan police station. I was led up a flight of stairs and down a hall to a secret office, which clearly was for the FSB. And then I was finally told why they were arresting me again. For my YouTube videos. In the description of my video, I had written the word invasion. I had not written who was invading who, and it had nothing to do with the video. But according to them, this was proof of discrediting the armed forces. I was then told that, terrifyingly, the very next day, I was going to be put on trial for my crimes. And so, I was led back down the stairs, and I was put in yet another jail cell in the police station, where I was supposed to stay overnight. This cell was a bit bigger, but it also smelled like a garbage dump, and I nearly froze to death that night. I don't think I got any sleep in that cell that night. I knew all this was bad. I just had to hope the trial would be fair. Any idiot could see that my videos are not about the war in Ukraine. But sadly, this was Russia. The next morning, I'm taken to the courthouse in Birobidzhan. The FSB are there. I haven't been able to change my clothes or shower in 3 days. I'm led into a small room where the trial is supposed to take place. The trial begins, and the female judge announces that I'm there not for the crime of my YouTube videos, but for resisting arrest. And right there and then, I knew I was in a bad place. This is the nightmare everyone hears about Russia. A fake crime, a fake trial. My interpreter was literally there to help convict me. The trial was over in minutes. Guilty, the judge announced. I was given the maximum penalty allowed, 15 days in jail. And then very quickly afterward, they immediately held the trial that they said I was originally there for discrediting the armed forces with my YouTube videos. Once again, the trial was over in minutes. Guilty. A 50,000 ruble fine, or $500. It all happened so quickly it was hard to process. Something evil had just been done to me. They had just set me up for a fake crime. This wasn't justice, and I wasn't a criminal, but I was going to prison. They told me I'd be in prison for 15 days, but at this point, I didn't know if I'd ever get out of this. I was led to a police van and taken to a prison, or what they referred to as a detention center. Within 30 minutes of the trial ending, I'm placed in a prison cell all by myself. What would you be thinking if this happened to you? You were just convicted of 2 fake crimes. I had just told my family that everything was okay, and now I was in actual prison. I was doing everything to maintain my sanity at this point. In the prison, there are COs that go on patrols up and down the cell blocks. There's 2 cameras in your cell. There's a light that never goes off. There's always noise outside. You always feel like you're being watched. My immediate concerns after the trial were they still hadn't given me back my luggage or passport. What if they planted something in it? What if they put something in my food? I had all kinds of paranoid thoughts at that point. One of the COs was a woman who spoke a tiny amount of English. She was somewhat friendly, and I wanted to share what had happened to me. I decided to voice my concerns about the police and my luggage. In my poor Russian, I said, "Ani plохие люди, я беспокоюсь о моей багаже." They're bad people, I said. I'm worried about my luggage. This was a bad idea. Later that night, I was suddenly taken out of the cell. I was led forward to the front of the prison. Nothing was said. Then, right outside, I'm forcefully taken by 4 police officers into an unmarked SUV. The FSB officer who had originally interrogated me is there in the front seat. No one is telling me where we're going. Then he turned around and said to me, "Thomas, my contact at the prison told me you said I'm a bad person. That's not good. We don't want something to happen to you." The car drove on in silence. It's at this point that I thought I was going to die. I thought I was about to be pushed out of a window, and no one would ever know what happened to me. 15 long minutes later, we arrive at a hospital. It's the same one from before. "Thomas, we need to drug test you again," the officer told me. And it's at this point that I didn't really trust anything anymore. And I don't know where I got the courage, but I refused it. I asked for a lawyer. I had no idea if I was even allowed to have a lawyer, but apparently something I said was right, because the FSB then went down a hall and started strategizing on how to get me to do the test. I think they were afraid that I was actually right. I could get a lawyer and just not do the test. But eventually they came back and told me if I refused to do the test, I would just be convicted of the same crime again and go to prison for another 15 days. And so I was stuck. Again, what do you even do in a situation like this? I know that they want to send me to prison for a longer sentence for drug possession and usage. And the last time, I had received a false result of having meth in my system. I had no idea if this test would be fair. I was not sure about anything at this point, but it didn't seem like there was any way that they were going to let me not do this test, so I finally agreed. Again, I had to pee in a cup, but this time the FSB officers stood literally around me watching. I don't think I've ever seen anyone as desperate to look at my manhood as the FSB. They tell me the test will be fair, and I can watch the whole process. The technician tells me they'll test for weed, meth, and coke. The sample is placed in a machine. It's negative. I breathe the biggest sigh of relief in the world. I sign a document saying my result was clean, and I'm driven back to the prison to spend my first night there, with 14 to go. On my second day in prison, and the fifth being detained, I suddenly got some good news. I would get my luggage and my passport back. Whenever something comes into the prison, the COs have to check if it's allowed into the cell. And then here comes my luggage with souvenirs and stuff from everywhere from Ireland to China. The CO told me that they had never had a prisoner like me before. I asked if there had ever been another foreigner in the jail, and they stretched their memory to say there had been one French guy before. Although it's interesting that they would say that. Apparently they were not on duty 2 years ago when that very same city, Birbijan, arrested another YouTuber, one that I'm sure you've heard of, called Bald and Bankrupt. He was in the same prison for 2 days in 2022. What a wonderful place, doing wonders for their tourism. I was almost in a good mood, going through all my things that I've been carrying for the last 6 months. After all, my bag, my luggage is basically my life. I don't actually have a house. When all of a sudden, an entire squadron of FSB officers shows up. They had come to investigate my luggage, they said. They brought everything. They brought some local English teacher as an interpreter. They brought some guy who could speak really bad Chinese, I guess in case I had any secret Chinese drugs. And then they had me stand with all the officers and take a big picture. You know, like a big group photo. You know, one of those photos they place in a newspaper showing how they caught the local drug kingpin. It was ridiculous. It was so ridiculous that in the moment, as scared as I was, all I could do was just put a big smile on my face while everyone else had this solemn, we caught the criminal expression. Apparently, they were now somehow sure that I had drugs. They were trying to Britney Griner me. I had no choice but to sit there in the prison and hope they'd be fair. I'd have to hope that I had not somehow left something in my luggage, because if it was literally anything, if it was even just traces of marijuana or something like that, that would have been enough to keep me in prison for years. They made me sit for an entire week in the prison wondering this, before they finally sent back my luggage with a note saying that there was no problem. After this, the FSB stopped harassing me for a while. I was left to serve out my sentence. I had to get used to prison life. The prison cell was at least bigger than the ones I had before. There was a sink and a toilet in the room, although in reality, the toilet was just a hole in the ground. You were only allowed to shower once a week, so if you didn't want to stink, you had to just wash in the sink. When you actually got to use the shower room, it seemed like you were put there by yourself, so probably not a lot of dropping the soap in Russian prison, if you know what I mean. There was no prison yard with weights like I imagine you'd have in an American prison, or at least that's what I've seen in the movies. Exercise time was literally just being led outside to an outdoor cage, and you got to walk in circles. Usually there was ice on the ground, so not the safest thing to do. They'd put the prisoners together to socialize, but for some reason they always kept me separate. I don't know if this was to protect me or to protect them. Couldn't have them being corrupted by an American spy, I guess. But otherwise, most of the time was just spent in your cell, staring at the wall. I had a cellmate for the first 7 days, a middle-aged guy who had spent 6 years in prison before for daring to have his own marijuana plant in his apartment for personal use. Nice guy, though. We got along well. The days were slow, agonizingly slow. There was nothing to do. Every day, twice a day at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., The COs would all come into the cell and make sure nothing was out of place on the wall or floor, I guess to make sure I wasn't digging a hole or something. I started going to bed super early at 8:30, just to make the day go by a little bit faster. And slowly the time passed. The whole time I didn't know if I'd ever get out. I thought if they put me in there for a fake crime, well, they could just invent another one to keep me there. But I got one big break that gave me hope. My family and other people close to me were able to contact the embassy and even set up a lawyer. I was kind of amazed that I could even get a lawyer. The police or the courts never mentioned this unless I asked about it. With a lawyer, I was able to appeal both of the supposed crimes I was charged with, and we easily won. The police made many mistakes when setting up their fake crimes, and once I was in a legitimate court, the judge ruled in my favor. The only problem was that, again, this is Russia. Even if you win the appeal, the case is just sent back to the original court and judge, and we had to do a retrial, which was unwinnable. And then, after 15 days, finally, my sentence was over. I had planned to immediately get out of the prison, go to the nearest airport, and leave that day, anywhere, although the only option was China. But it couldn't be that simple. The FSB didn't let me enjoy just that feeling of relief walking out of prison as a free man. No, they were once again all waiting outside, waiting to bring me to the courthouse. I had to attend the retrial after my successful appeal. They wanted this conviction on my record to ban me from coming back to Russia. It was very important to them. So instead, I spent this day where I was supposed to be going home in the same courthouse that had convicted me and sent me to prison for 15 days. Predictably, I lost the case, but by then, it was too late to get a new transit visa and get to the airport. So I had to spend one last terrifying night in Birobidzhan, wondering if the police would show up and arrest me again. I wasn't even allowed to check into a hotel because my visa had been canceled. So I had to find a kind of Russian Airbnb and just hide out there for the night. Hello. I just spent the last 18 days in prison, and I'm currently at the migration office in Birobidzhan. My visa was just canceled, and all I'm hoping to do right now is just get out of this country. With any luck, we'll do that tomorrow. So this is the apartment that I had to hole up in last night. Because my visa was canceled, I'm not even able to stay in any hotel. I'm literally staying in a safe house. I feel like I'm in a movie. Да. Широкая шеста. Just given what's called a transit visa. I have literally just 2 days to leave the country. There's a flight leaving from the nearest large city, which is called Khabarovsk, and I gotta get there quick, so I'm waiting for a taxi to show up right now. I want this nightmare to be over, and it won't be over until, sadly, I'm out of Russia. Hey, how you doing? You were never falsely imprisoned in Russia. How you doing? И в Китай.
А это все одно тут.
Unsurprisingly, everybody getting onto my flight is Chinese. Because we're going to some city in China I've never heard of. Jiangsu. Only flight of the day. Correction. One flight per week. And this is the one. About to hop on a flight on a Chinese airline I've never heard of. As far as I know, it only flies to Russia. And we're about to escape this nightmare.
任何人禁止损坏洗手间内的烟雾探测器。
We are just moments away from flying out of this country. I don't feel like this is over until this flight is in the air. Even on a flight between Russia and China, they're still doing the announcements in English. And we are in China. There has never been an American happier to arrive in China than this guy right here. The ordeal is over. I can go back to my life. So we are in a town, a city called Jiangsu, a place I had never heard of until yesterday. Even someone like me who had lived in China for like 6 years, who had traveled all over the Northeast, never heard of Jiangsu. But Jiangsu had a flight from Khabarovsk. And thank you, Jiangsu. I will always appreciate your existence. But now I think I'm going to leave and go to some bigger city in China and have a big, hearty Chinese meal. Let's enjoy the freedom of China. All the things you're not allowed to bring on a train in China. Fireworks, makeup, a grenade. Do not bring your grenades on the train, or knives, or handguns. And definitely don't bring your makeup either. Just looking at how ridiculously long my beard got while I was there. They didn't allow you to shave. They didn't even allow you to take a shower, actually. They gave you like once a week when you could take one. It's crazy. Oh, by the way, like on the flight over, I was expecting it to be like an empty flight. Like, who the hell is flying between Khabarovsk and Jiangsu? But it turned out that entire flight was full of Chinese workers that had gone over to Russia to build an oil and gas plant. And the project was done, and they're all heading home. So it's possible that flight was not only just once a week, it might have been like once a month. Stroke of luck. Not a lot of flights heading out of there. What can I say? It's good to be in Shanghai, the city I lived in for 6 years. I thought it would be a good idea to wait a few weeks before I picked up a camera again. In those days, immediately after I escaped from Russia, it's hard to describe exactly how I felt. I faced few things in my life that have messed with me mentally as much as that did. And over the past few weeks, just focused on relaxing, being with friends, just having fun while traveling, not thinking about any of this. Had to take some time to get back to a normal mindset. Whatever normal is. Apparently normal is just worrying about insignificant things all day, checking your phone 1,000 times a day. I guess that's normal. When I left Russia, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of peace that's almost indescribable. I didn't care when somebody cut off my taxi in traffic. I didn't care if somebody didn't wait in line properly. If something was overpriced, I didn't worry about it. Didn't care about bargaining. Didn't care what some stupid celebrity or politician said in America. It was all meaningless. When I was in prison, when I was locked up, all I wanted to do was just go through those metal bars and see the birds that I heard chirping outside the window. You know, I would have just given anything to take a walk in a park, feel the sun on my pale face. With no smartphone or electronics in prison, in a way I kind of lost my smartphone addiction when I came out. I didn't have that urge to check my phone anymore, you know? I felt more like I was living in the present. I went back to some habits that I used to do, but don't really do anymore, like writing. I like writing again. I think I'm gonna write a book now. Wrote so much already, sitting in that jail cell. Speaking of writing, someone did not check the English on this sign. Be careful to slip. There is a rockery waterfall. So, you know, be careful. Make sure you slip. Oh, that was a good one. Listen, I know a lot of you think I'm insane, or kind of dumb for going to Russia. And that's fair. I have maybe too high of a risk tolerance. I'll admit that. But I don't go out of my way to risk my life. You know, I'm not gonna go and fly into the middle of a war zone in Sudan, for example. I like living. I value my life. Yeah. I just have a wanderer's soul. That's all it really is. And I have this desire to keep exploring and see every country in the world, eventually. Even though there's no prize waiting at the end. I just love the world. You know what I mean? I grew up without money to travel. But even as a kid, I was always looking at globes, wondering what were in these places, these mysterious places I saw on a map. I love our differences. The differences between different nations, people groups. The real diversity of the world. I love all the different languages, dialects, all the different cultures, all the different geography and history that has shaped the world into the different nations that we have today. I just want to go out there and see all of it. And it's this curiosity that gets me in trouble sometimes. Because not everyone is like that. she's like that. But in a country with a tyrannical government like Russia, speaking different languages and being curious got me accused of being a spy. And that's tragic. Even in spite of all this, I still love the Russian people. And if this hadn't have happened, I would have kept on exploring the country and showing the good side of Russia. The side of Russia that's now been overshadowed by the atrocities of the government. There were still so many places in Russia I wanted to see, like Lake Baikal, the famous Lake Baikal that every Russian recommended I go and visit. I wanted to go to Yakutia, the coldest city in the world. I wanted to go over to Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands, islands that used to be Japanese until the Russians took them in World War II. And finally, I wanted to go up to Kamchatka, Chukotka, the parts of Russia, the very end of Russia, that looks out on Alaska. But I guess I'll only ever visit these places in my dreams, because I can never go back there. I'll never feel safe going back to Russia after that. And it just makes me wonder, for the people that put me in jail, are you really happy with this? At worst, I was promoting tourism to your country. Ooh, I made a few jokes once in a while. And I mean, listen, I was never going to do propaganda, and I was definitely never going to support the ridiculous war in Ukraine. But overall, I was showing the country in a positive light. And now for all those people who might have been considering a trip to Russia, now they're going to see how Russia really treats tourists. All you've done is confirm everyone's worst fears about Russia. And he did all this for what? To get a promotion? You would have been happy with me sitting in prison for years and my life ruined, so that what? You can get an extra $500 per month, so that you could be in Russian media and claim that you caught an American spy, an American drug dealer. Absolute scum. No. You've disgraced your country. You've disgraced Russia to the point where even China seems like a bastion of freedom by comparison. And look, I'm under no illusions that the country I'm standing in right now doesn't have some of the same issues that Russia does. I will admit, I'm a lot more familiar with China than I am with Russia. I spent a lot more time here. Perhaps that does add a bit of bias into how I view the two places. Over the past year, surprising even to me, it's become popular on YouTube. All the travel vloggers that started going to China and showing the nice infrastructure, the organization, talking about how the West misunderstands China. And don't get me wrong, I'm actually happy about this. But these are things I knew about China 7 years ago. When people try to paint China as just, you know, this singular evil force that does nothing good, I didn't think that was fair. But those same vloggers that come here and make their carbon copy video of how China is not what you imagine it to be, don't ever mention that right here on Ulaanbaatar 2 years ago, some of the biggest protests in modern China's history took place. And it was those protests that finally ended the zero COVID lockdown policies of the country. The people that gathered here were some of the bravest people I could ever imagine. Ulaanbaatar is the name of the capital of Xinjiang province, the province of the Uyghurs. And it was there during the COVID lockdowns, when China was still doing a zero COVID policy, that a fire took place. Many people died, and the people here in Shanghai decided to come to this street, and it eventually mobilized into a much more massive protest. Just mentioning that makes me feel uncomfortable, because you never know, it could mess with my ability to keep coming here. But the people that participated in those protests, a lot of them are locked away in some secret prison right now, and no one mentions them. It's not ever mentioned. No one gives a shit about them anymore. Well, I give a shit, because I almost had the same thing happen to me. So now that I've told you that story, where do I go after this? Well, I gotta get back on the road. That's where I belong. I gotta finish my trip from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, and I was almost done. But honestly, all that isn't that important. What's important is that I'm still here. I'm really sorry for making you worry, if I did. I'm really incredibly happy to still be here with all of you. You really have no idea. I've now been to prison. To prison. That is not something I thought I would ever say in my entire life. It gives me more street cred, I guess. But I really hope it's not something you'll ever have to say. Because freedom is one of those things that you don't fully appreciate until it's gone. I'll see you next time.